The handcuffs clicked shut in the middle of Hargrove Plaza on a Tuesday afternoon, and every shopper within 30 feet stopped moving. A woman stood at the center of the atrium, composed, still, one wrist caught behind her back, while a uniformed security guard yanked the other arm around to meet it. She wasn't struggling, she wasn't screaming, she just stood there with her chin level and her jaw tight, watching the people around her pull out their phones like she was a car accident they couldn't look away from. What none of them knew, not the security guard, not the two officers who came jogging through the food court entrance with their hands already reaching, was that the woman standing in those handcuffs was Sergeant First Class Nora Voss, decorated Army combat medic, 10-year veteran of 2 combat deployments, and as of 72 hours from now, the incoming captain of the Callaway City Police Department. The badge was in her bag. The appointment letter was in her bag. Her entire future was in that bag, and nobody thought to look. They just locked her wrists together and started talking about shoplifting. If you've made it this far, don't stop now. Follow along until the very end. Like this video and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Nora had been in Callaway City for 11 days. She'd driven in from Fort Delray with 2 duffel bags, a lease on a 3rd-floor apartment she'd never seen in person, and a start date that felt both too close and not close enough. The transition from military service to civilian law enforcement had taken 14 months of processing, background review, and interviews with the City Oversight Board, a process so slow and bureaucratic it had made her feel more than once like she was trying to break into a building she'd already been invited into. Chief Gerald Mack had recruited her personally. He'd seen her service record, her commendations, her post-deployment work running emergency medical operations in 3 different forward operating bases. He'd called her twice before she agreed to meet him. The second time, he'd said something she hadn't forgotten. Callaway needs someone who's been somewhere, not just someone who's read about it. She understood what he meant when she read the department's internal review files, the ones he'd sent as a preview of what she'd be walking into. 3 excessive force complaints buried in the last 18 months, 2 whistleblower cases closed without investigation, a deputy chief with a personnel file thick enough to use as a doorstop, and a record of promotions that made no sense unless you knew who he played golf with. Nora had read every page. She'd taken notes. But right now she wasn't thinking about any of that. Right now she was thinking about whether the gray blazer she'd been looking at in the window of Hargrove's flagship department store was worth the price, and whether she could get in and out before the afternoon rush clogged the parking structure. She needed something to wear to her swearing in. She didn't own anything appropriate. 10 years of Army uniforms didn't exactly prepare a person for standing behind a podium in a navy blazer, looking like she belonged in a City Hall auditorium. She pushed through the department store's glass doors at 2:17 p.m. The store was called Meridian, and it occupied the northeast anchor of Hargrove Plaza, 3 floors of polished wood fixtures, soft lighting, and price tags that made Nora briefly consider whether the Army surplus store across town had blazers. She moved through the women's section methodically, the way she moved through most things, a route, a purpose, no backtracking. She pulled 2 blazers in her size, added a pair of dark slacks she hadn't been looking for but clearly needed, and spent 4 minutes deciding between a white dress shirt and an ivory one before choosing the white and immediately second-guessing it. She paid at the 2nd-floor register, cash and card split, the way she'd done since her first deployment when the Army taught her that contingency planning applied to everything, including retail transactions. The cashier, a young woman with a name tag that read Bess, folded the blazer with more care than Nora thought necessary, but appreciated anyway. "Nice choice," Bess said, sliding the garment bag across the counter. "Thanks. It's for work." "What do you do?" Nora tucked the receipt into the outer pocket of her bag. "I'm in law enforcement." Bess handed over the shopping bag with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. And Nora didn't read anything into it because people smiled like that when they were tired and it was Tuesday and their shift wasn't over yet. She understood that. She took the escalator down to the 1st floor intending to leave. She didn't leave. She passed a display of leather goods near the main entrance and stopped, not because she wanted a wallet, but because something about the lighting and the layout made her notice, without entirely meaning to, that one of the display cases had been recently disturbed, a gap on the shelf, the kind of gap that suggests something had been there and wasn't anymore. She looked at it for maybe 3 seconds. Then she looked toward the exit. A man was moving fast. Not running, People don't run in department stores unless something's wrong and they want you to know it. He was doing that thing people do when they want to move quickly without moving quickly. Slightly too long a stride, slightly too forward a lean, eyes aimed at the exit like it was the only thing in the room. He was maybe 30, wearing a dark jacket that looked a size too large. Nora stepped aside. Not to stop him. That wasn't her job yet. And even when it was, plainclothes intervention in a retail theft situation wasn't in her lane. She stepped aside because she was standing in his path, and she didn't feel like getting knocked over. He went through the exit. Nora stood there for a second, watching the door settle back into its frame. Then she heard the radio crackle somewhere near the customer service desk. Then two things happened very fast. A security guard, young, bulky, moving with the energy of someone who'd been sitting for 4 hours and finally had a reason not to, came through the interior door at a near jog, and a description started coming through the radio that Nora could only partially hear. Female suspect, dark coat. She looked down at her own jacket. It was charcoal gray. In certain lighting, in a certain mood, someone might call it dark. She looked up and found the security guard looking directly at her. His name tag read D. Parrish, and he had the look of a man who had already decided something before he'd finished walking across the floor. He was young, early 20s maybe, and he carried himself with the specific confidence of someone who'd had authority for less than a year and hadn't yet learned the places where that confidence could hurt him. "Ma'am," he put himself between Nora and the exit. "I need you to come with me." "What's this about?" "We've had a theft. I need you to come with me." Nora looked at him steadily. "I have receipts for everything I purchased. My bags are right here if you want to look at them." "I need you to come with me to the security office. You can sort it out there." She could have pushed back harder. She knew that. She also knew that pushing back in a department store security situation almost always made things worse, regardless of whether you were right. She'd seen it enough times from the other side. The moment a person got confrontational, everything after that got filtered through that confrontation. She went. The security office was a room behind customer service that smelled like recycled air and old coffee. One camera monitor on the wall cycling through feeds. A desk with a chair on each side. Another guard, older, heavier, not wearing a name tag, stood against the wall with his arms crossed. Parrish told her to sit. She sat. "Can you tell me what item you're alleging was taken?" Nora asked. "We'll get to that. I'd like to know now, because I have receipts for everything in my bag, and if there's a discrepancy, I can clear it up in about 30 seconds. We're waiting for the officers." She paused. "You called the police?" "Protocol." Nora looked at the monitor on the wall. The camera cycled. She watched the main floor feed for a moment and saw nothing unusual. No ongoing incident, no secondary suspect. Just shoppers moving between racks. The man who'd walked out of that store was long gone. She thought about saying that. She thought about the exact words she would use. She was still arranging them when the door opened and two officers walked in. The first one was tall, mid-40s, with the kind of posture that came from a long time in uniform. His nameplate read T. Broward. He scanned the room with a quick automatic sweep, and something in the way he did it told Nora he'd done this 1,000 times and wasn't expecting this particular situation to be complicated. The second officer was younger, late 20s, dark hair, a jaw that sat permanently tight like he was bracing for something. Nameplate G. Ferris. He looked at Nora the way some officers looked at suspects before any evidence had been reviewed, which is to say, he looked at her like she was already guilty, and this was just the confirmation stage. "This the one?" Ferris asked Parrish. Parrish said yes. Nora said, "I'd like to clarify." "In a minute," Ferris said. She stopped. Not because he'd told her to, but because she was running a calculation in her head, the same one she'd run in difficult situations for most of her adult life. What's the most effective path through this? What's the least damage? What information do you need and in what order? "What was taken?" she asked Broward instead, addressing the senior officer directly. "Because I bought several items from the second floor. I have receipts, and I'd like to resolve this quickly." Broward looked at her with slightly more attention than Ferris had given her. "What's your name, ma'am?" "Nora Voss." "Ms. Voss, we received a report of a shoplifting incident. You match the description of the suspect." "What was the description?" He hesitated. "Officer Broward," she said, keeping her voice even. I'm asking because I'd like to understand the basis for my detention. I'm not being difficult. I would just like to know what description I'm being told I match. Broward glanced at Parrish. Parrish said, "Female, dark coat." The room was quiet for a moment. Nora looked down at her jacket. Then she looked at the bags on the table in front of her. The suspect was described as female in a dark coat. She let that sit. That's the description. Ma'am, there were at least 40 women in that store when I was shopping. I would estimate a third of them were wearing dark outerwear. That's a very broad description, officer. Ferris moved. He came around the table and picked up her shopping bag. Can I look through this? Yes, Nora said. Go ahead. He went through it. He pulled out the garment bag, unzipped it, checked inside, re-zipped it. He checked the outer pockets of her carry bag, went through the interior, shifted things around with the particular lack of care that communicated something about his attitude toward the process. He didn't find anything. He went through the bag again. Still nothing. Nora watched him. She had the receipts paper-clipped together in the outer pocket. And she'd told him that, but he hadn't touched the outer pocket yet. He'd gone straight for the main compartment with the energy of someone who was looking for a specific outcome rather than an answer. Outer pocket, she said. The receipts are in the outer pocket. He found them. He looked at them. He looked at the items. He looked back at the receipts. Then he put everything on the table and turned to Broward with an expression Nora couldn't quite read. There was a long moment. Then Ferris said, "She's got receipts." Parrish straightened against the wall. The description matched. "She's got receipts," Ferris said again, and this time there was a tone in it. Something that wasn't quite frustration. Something that wasn't quite embarrassment. It landed somewhere between the two and communicated that even Ferris, whose default was assumption, was starting to recognize that the ground here wasn't as solid as advertised. "I'd like my belongings back," Nora said. Nobody moved. "I'd also like to know whether I'm being charged with anything or whether I'm free to leave." Broward said, "You're free to leave, Ms. Voss. We apologize for the inconvenience." Parrish started to say something. Broward looked at him. Parrish stopped. Nora picked up her bags. She picked up her receipts. She walked out of the security office and through customer service and out the main entrance of Meridian without looking back. She stood in the atrium of Hargrove Plaza for a moment with the shopping bag hanging from her left hand and the afternoon light coming down through the skylights, and she breathed in once, carefully, and breathed out. Then she kept walking. The thing people didn't understand about her, the thing most people never got the chance to understand, was that Nora Voss didn't react. Not in the moment. Not while whatever was happening was still happening. She'd learned that in her first deployment, in a field trauma situation that had lasted 9 hours and ended with everyone alive partly because she'd refused to let herself feel any of it until it was over. The feeling came later. On the drive home, or in the shower, or at 3 in the morning when everything quiet enough for it to arrive. She drove back to her apartment. She hung the blazer in her closet. She sat on the edge of her bed for a few minutes with her hands on her knees, not doing anything in particular. Then she opened the folder she kept on her nightstand, the one with the department files Chief Mack had sent her, and she read for an hour. 3 days later, Nora Voss walked into the Callaway City Police Department headquarters at 7:53 in the morning, 7 minutes before her swearing-in was scheduled to begin. She wore the gray blazer. The building was a converted municipal structure on 4th and Hartwell. 6 floors, a lobby with checkered tile and fluorescent lights that had been fighting each other for 20 years, and a front desk sergeant who buzzed her through without looking up from his monitor. Chief Gerald Mack was waiting in the 3rd-floor conference room. He was 61, short, with a handshake like a structural test and eyes that had spent decades deciding things fast. He'd served in Callaway City PD for 33 years. He was 2 years from retirement, and he was tired in the specific way that came from watching institutions fail the same tests over and over. He'd told Nora on the phone that he needed someone who wasn't part of the existing culture, someone who could look at the department without the loyalty that made it impossible to see straight. She was that someone. The swearing-in was small. Chief Mack, the city clerk, a photographer from the department communications office, and 2 patrol supervisors who stood in the back with the careful expressions of people who weren't sure what to make of what was happening. Nora raised her right hand. She said the words. The clerk handed her the badge. It was heavier than she expected. She'd held plenty of things that were supposed to feel significant. Commendations, promotions, transfer orders. Most of them felt like paper. The badge felt like something else, like a proposition, like a question about whether she was going to be the kind of person who carried what it asked her to carry. She pinned it to her blazer. "Congratulations, Captain Voss," Chief Max said. "Thank you, Chief." He looked at her with the particular expression of someone who wanted to say more and was choosing not to. Then he handed her a folder. "Your first briefing is at 9, full department. I'd like you to run it." She looked at the folder. "What's on the agenda?" "Whatever you decide needs to be on it." What? At 9 a.m., Nora walked into the main briefing room on the second floor. It held 43 officers. She'd read their files, all of them, on the drive down from Fort Delray. She knew their names, their years of service, their commendations, and their complaints. She knew who had clean records and who had records that were technically clean because someone had made sure they stayed that way. She stood at the front of the room and looked at them for a moment before she said anything. Most of them looked back with the muted attention of people waiting to be told what they already knew. Some looked curious. A few looked hostile in the very specific way of people who'd heard this new captain was an outsider and had decided what that meant before she'd spoken a word. In the third row, left side, G. Ferris. He was looking at the folder on the table in front of him, not at her. She said, "My name is Captain Nora Voss. I start today. Most of you are reading that sentence off my badge right now because you've never heard my name before. And that's fine. I'm going to keep this simple. I'm here to do the job. If you're here to do the job, we're going to work well together. If you're here for something else, that's something we'll figure out as we go." Quiet. She opened the folder Chief Mack had given her. She pulled out a single sheet. "I want to read something to you. This is an incident report filed 3 days ago, Tuesday the 14th, at approximately 2:17 p.m. Location, Hargrove Plaza, Meridian Department Store." She looked up briefly, then back at the page. Responding officers detailed to a shoplifting call in progress. Suspect described as female, dark coat. Officers arrived on scene, interviewed subject, conducted bag search, found receipts, and no stolen merchandise. Incident classified as unfounded. Subject released. She set the page down. "What this report doesn't include," she said, "is that the subject spent 22 minutes in the security office of that department store before her belongings were searched. It doesn't include that she told the responding officers she had receipts 3 separate times before anyone looked at them. It doesn't include that the actual suspect, the individual who triggered the shoplifting call, left the building while officers were still responding." She paused. "I know all of this because the subject was me." The room didn't go silent exactly. It was already quiet. But the quality of the quiet changed. 43 people recalibrated simultaneously, some of them quickly and some of them not at all. In the third row, G. Ferris looked up. She met his eyes for exactly 1 second. "I'm not reading this report because I want anyone to feel bad about a mistake. I'm reading it because it's a case study. An individual matched a 2-word description, female, dark coat, and that was enough to detain her for 22 minutes without checking the most obvious evidence first. That tells me something about how assumptions are being used in this department, and I want everyone in this room to sit with that." She closed the folder. "Now, here's what the next 30 days look like." She walked them through it. Operational reviews, complaint file audits, a restructured field supervision protocol that she'd drafted herself on the drive down. She didn't use notes. She'd had it memorized for 2 weeks. Nobody interrupted her. Not because they were intimidated, but because she wasn't speaking the way someone speaks when they want to intimidate. She was speaking the way someone speaks when they know exactly what they're doing and don't need the room to perform agreement in order to keep going. When she finished, she said, "Questions?" A hand went up in the back row. Officer Broward. "Captain, when you say complaint file audit, are we talking about internal affairs or are you running that through your office?" "My office, with IA support." "What's the scope?" 18 months. The number landed. She watched it land, saw the specific flicker in several faces, the quick calculation of what 18 months covered and what it didn't. "Anything else?" "Nothing." Dismissed. They filtered out in clusters, the way people always did after briefings. The ones who wanted to talk close together. The ones who wanted distance, moving fast. Nora stayed at the front and watched without making it obvious she was watching. Ferris left quickly, didn't look at her. A woman stopped near the door, turned back. Early 40s, sharp eyes, the kind of face that gave nothing away unless it wanted to. Deputy Chief Marlene Soto. Her file had been one of the thickest in the folder. Captain. She said it the way someone says a title when they're still deciding what it means. Welcome to the department. Thank you, Deputy Chief. 18 months is a broad scope. It is. Some of those complaints were reviewed and resolved. I know, I've read them. Nora held Soto's gaze. Reviewing resolved complaints is part of an audit, not an indictment. Soto nodded slowly. Just making sure we're clear on the process. We're clear, Nora said. Soto left. Nora stayed in the empty briefing room for a few minutes after that. She picked up the incident report from Hargrove Plaza and looked at it one more time. She thought about the man who had walked out of Meridian in the dark jacket. She thought about the way Parrish had come across the floor with his decision already made. She thought about 22 minutes in a back room while the actual suspect disappeared into a parking structure somewhere. Then she thought about what was in her personnel file that Soto hadn't seen yet, what she'd brought from Fort Delray, what 14 months of preparation and 10 years of service and 2 combat deployments looked like when it finally got organized and pointed at a specific problem. She put the report in her folder. She was going to need everything she had. The call came at 6:47 that evening, while Nora was in her office reviewing the complaint files IA had pulled for her first audit batch. It came from dispatch, patched through to her desk line, which meant it had been escalated past the duty sergeant, which meant something was already wrong enough that someone didn't want to make the decision alone. Captain Voss? Captain, this is Dispatch Supervisor Yelena Park. We have a situation at Hargrove Plaza. Nora set down the file she was holding. What kind of situation? Security incident. Mall security discovered a camera tampering at approximately 18:30. They're reporting that the Meridian store footage from Tuesday the 14th has been accessed and partially deleted from the security server. Nora was very still for a moment. The footage from the 14th, she said. Yes, ma'am, the footage that would have covered the shoplifting call at approximately 14:17. Who accessed the server? That's the issue, Captain. Mall security is saying access was logged under a Callaway City PD credential, a badge number authenticated login. They flagged it to us about 40 minutes ago. Nora looked at the wall. Which badge number? Park read it to her. Nora knew the number. She'd memorized all of them. She sat very still with that number in her head and thought about the briefing that morning, and the specific way Ferris had left the room without looking at her, and the 18-month audit scope that had landed in that room like a stone in still water. Dispatch, I need you to hold that report at your level. Do not distribute it through normal channels. Understood. Good. I'm on my way to Hargrove Plaza. She put on her jacket. She picked up her badge. She walked out of her office and down the hall and hit the stairwell at a pace that wasn't quite running, but wasn't not running either, because something had just shifted. Something she'd been watching for had finally moved, and she needed to be at that mall before another 40 minutes passed and the window closed entirely. The elevator was already moving. She took the stairs. The parking structure at Hargrove Plaza was 3 levels and half empty at this hour, and Nora took the corner into the main lot faster than she should have and didn't care. She'd called Broward on the way over. Not Ferris. Broward had answered on the second ring, and she'd told him to meet her at the mall's security office without explaining why. And he'd said yes, Captain, without asking, which was either professionalism or alarm, and she wasn't sure which yet. The mall was still open. Retail hours ran until 9, but the evening crowd was thin, families with strollers moving toward the food court. A few teenagers anchored to a bench near the east entrance. A man walking a small dog in violation of at least 2 posted signs. Nora moved through all of it without breaking stride, her badge on her belt and her jacket open, and the few people who noticed her gave her the small automatic distance that a badge produces in public spaces. The security office was behind the management suite on the ground floor, past a door marked Authorized Personnel that a uniformed mall security officer held open for her when she showed her credentials. The room was larger than the one she'd sat in 3 days ago. This was the central security hub, a bank of monitors along one wall, a server rack against the back, and a desk where 2 people were standing rather than sitting, which is what people do when they're too agitated to be still. The first was a woman in her late 50s with reading glasses pushed up on her forehead and an expression that communicated she had been dealing with something unpleasant for the last hour, and was relieved someone with authority had finally arrived. Her lanyard read, Security Director, D. Callum. The second was a younger man Nora didn't recognize, dark jacket, the specific pale look of someone who had found something they weren't supposed to find. Captain Voss, Callum said, thank you for coming. Walk me through it, Callum gestured to the younger man. This is our systems technician, Marcus Webb. He found the breach. Webb said, I was running the nightly backup routine. We do it at 6 every evening. The system flagged an inconsistency in the file timestamps. When I looked at it, there was a gap in the footage archive. From Tuesday the 14th. From Tuesday the 14th, yes. A 47-minute window, 1400 to 1447. Nora did the math automatically. 2 p.m. to 2:47 p.m. The shoplifting call had been logged at 2:17. She'd been detained until approximately 2:39. The real suspect had left somewhere in that first window. All of it gone. The access log, she said. You told dispatch it showed a department credential. Yes. Webb pulled up a screen. The login was authenticated through our external access portal. We have a protocol that allows law enforcement to request footage remotely with a valid badge credential. The request came in at 5:12 p.m. Today, logged in for approximately 6 minutes, accessed the archive for that time window, and deleted it. Can you show me the credential? He showed her. She looked at the badge number on the screen for a moment longer than she needed to, because she already knew what it said, and she was using the extra seconds to make sure she was deciding clearly rather than reactively. I need a copy of that access log, she said. The raw log, not a screenshot, the actual system file, time-stamped and unedited. I can do that. I also need to know whether your system retains any automatic backups, not the main archive, anything secondary, a cloud sync, an off-site copy, anything your system generates automatically. Webb and Callum exchanged a look. We have a 30-day cloud backup, Callum said slowly, but it runs at midnight. If the deletion happened at 5:12, tonight's backup won't have the deleted files. But last night's backup would. Callum blinked. Last night's backup would have captured Tuesday's footage before it was deleted, yes. Can you pull from last night's backup without overwriting anything? Yes, if we access it read-only. Do that, Nora said. Do it right now, before anything else runs, before anyone else touches this system, and do it on a separate drive that you hand to me directly. Nobody else. Callum moved, Webb moved. Nora stepped back and let them work, and she stood there with her arms at her sides and her face doing nothing while her brain ran 3 tracks simultaneously, the access log, the backup footage, and the badge number on that screen. Broward arrived 12 minutes later. He came through the door with his hat in his hand, off duty, she realized, called in from whatever his evening had been. He took in the room fast and then looked at her. Captain, thank you for coming. What's the situation? Footage from Tuesday's shoplifting incident was deleted from the mall's security archive this afternoon. The deletion was made using a department credential. She handed him the printed copy of the access log that Webb had produced. I need you to look at that badge number. Broward looked at it. His face did something careful and controlled, and she watched the control and made a note of it. That's Ferris, he said. Yes. He looked up at her. Captain, I need to... Don't explain it to me yet. I'm not asking you to explain it. I'm telling you what we know, and I'm telling you that I need you to behave as though this information doesn't exist until I tell you otherwise. Can you do that? He was quiet for a beat. Then, yes. I also need you to think about Tuesday. You were there. You were in that security office with Ferris. I need you to tell me right now whether there was anything in his behavior that morning or afternoon that you noticed. Anything. Broward put his hat on the desk. He rubbed the back of his neck. He was the one who pushed for us to respond. The call came in as a shoplifting in progress, and those usually go to mall security first. We wait for escalation. Ferris said we should head over. Did he give a reason? He said the description matched someone mall security had flagged before. Broward paused. I didn't check that. I should have checked that. If there was a prior flag, it would have been in the dispatch notes, and I didn't look. Was there a prior flag? I don't know. Find out. Broward pulled out his phone. While he made calls, Callum handed Nora a small, external drive. The backup footage, she said quietly. Read-only access, pulled before tonight's sync. The file's intact. Nora took the drive. She held it in her hand for a moment. This small plastic thing that weighed almost nothing and contained, if Webb was right, the footage of a man leaving a store with merchandise he hadn't paid for, and footage of Nora herself leaving the same store 2 minutes later with a garment bag and receipts. She put the drive in her jacket pocket. "I need one more thing," she said to Callum. "Tuesday, when your officer, Parrish, when he responded to the shoplifting alert, what triggered it? What exactly did he see?" Callum hesitated. "I wasn't on shift Tuesday." "Who was?" "The shift supervisor Tuesday afternoon was—" She checked something on her tablet. "Roderick Timms. He's not on tonight. I need his contact information, and I need you to call him before he gets any other calls tonight." Callum nodded and moved to her phone. Broward came back. "No prior flag," he said, keeping his voice low. "Dispatch has no record of a prior flag on anyone matching Tuesday's description. Ferris made that up." Nora said nothing. She looked at the monitors for a moment. The main floor of the mall cycling through on the screens, normal Tuesday evening foot traffic, people walking in and out of stores. "Captain," Broward's voice had dropped further, "I need to tell you something." "Tell me." "Ferris and Deputy Chief Soto are close. I don't know what that means exactly, but they're close. He's covered for her before, or she's covered for him. I don't know which direction it runs. He stopped. "I thought you should know." She looked at him. "How long have you known that?" "A while." "Why hasn't it been in any complaint file?" He didn't answer, which was its own answer. "All right," Nora said. She wasn't going to push him on it tonight. He told her now, and that was what mattered. "Go home. Don't discuss this with anyone. I'll contact you tomorrow." "What are you going to do?" "I'm going to review footage." She left the mall at 8:14 with the external drive in her pocket and the access log in her folder, and the specific kind of careful focus that comes from realizing that the problem you were told you were walking into is the same shape as the problem you just walked into, and the two things are connected, and you have enough to start pulling the thread. She spent 3 hours that night in her apartment with her laptop and the external drive and a legal pad. She filled 6 pages of in a handwriting that got smaller and tighter as the hours went on. The footage was intact. She watched it 3 times. The first time to confirm the basic sequence. The man in the dark jacket, heavy set, maybe 35, a gray stripe on his sneakers that was identifiable once you knew to look for it, moving through the leather goods section at 2:09 p.m. His right hand moving toward the display case, something disappearing into his jacket, his pace shifting in the way it shifts when someone has committed to leaving. He was through the exit at 2:11. Nora herself appeared on the first floor camera at 2:14, coming off the escalator, moving toward the leather goods section, not toward the exit, toward the display. She stopped. She looked at the gap in the display for maybe 5 seconds. Then she looked toward the exit. Then she stepped aside, and the man was gone from frame, and she stood there for another few seconds before she started walking toward the door herself. She reached the exit at 2:16. She paused there, the footage showed it clearly, and turned back briefly to look at something before going through the door. Parrish appeared on screen at 2:18. He came through the interior door at a jog, swept the floor, and looked directly at Nora, who was, by this point, outside in the atrium. He went after her. The man with the gray-striped sneakers was nowhere in any frame after 2:11. The second time through, Nora watched for the cameras Parrish could have seen from the security office. There were 2 angles that would have shown the first floor section clearly. Anyone in the security office, watching the monitor at 2:09, would have seen the man in the dark jacket, would have seen exactly what he did. The question was whether Parrish had been watching. The third time through, she made timestamps. She wrote them all down. She cross-referenced them with the incident report Broward had filed, the one that said officers arrived at 2:23 and the subject was identified and interviewed and released. The report didn't mention the man in the dark jacket at all. Not as a prior suspect, not as an alternative suspect, not as anything. He simply didn't exist in the official record. She capped her pen. She thought about the badge number on the deletion log. She thought about a 6-minute remote access session at 5:12 in the afternoon, 3 hours after her briefing, 2 hours after she'd read that incident report aloud in front of 43 officers. Someone had heard that briefing, understood what it meant, and moved fast. That told her something useful. Panic decisions had different fingerprints than calculated ones. If Ferris had gone straight from that briefing room to a computer and remotely deleted the footage, He'd done it in fear, not strategy. Fear-based decisions left gaps. She was going to find the gaps. The next morning, she arrived at the department at 6:50 and was in her office with the door closed before most of the day shift had badged in. She'd sent 3 emails the night before, one to the city's records department requesting a full copy of every complaint filed against G. Ferris in the last 3 years, one to Internal Affairs requesting the case numbers associated with those complaints, and one to Chief Mack's office flagging a pending personnel matter that required his attention before end of day. She didn't name names in any of them. She used language that meant something to people who read these documents every day and nothing to anyone else. At 7:43, she received a knock on her door. "Come in." It was Ferris. He came in and closed the door behind him, which was either a reasonable professional instinct or a specific choice, and she wasn't going to decide which yet. He was in uniform, hat under his arm, jaw doing its characteristic tight hinge thing. "Captain Voss," he said. "Officer Ferris." She didn't stand. She looked at him across the desk. "Sit down." He sat. She let the silence go for a moment, not as a power move. She didn't have patience for theater, but because she was watching him, and what she was watching was how he handled the silence. Some people filled it immediately. Some people waited. Ferris filled it. "I wanted to come and apologize," he said. "For Tuesday. The mall. He stopped. Started again. "I didn't handle it right. I should have checked the receipts first." "That's true." He seemed slightly thrown by the directness. He'd probably expected more resistance, more need to push his way through. "I wanted you to know that it wasn't personal. I didn't know who you were." "I know you didn't. And the briefing yesterday, I understood the point you were making. I want to be a better officer." Nora looked at him for a moment. He was performing, but he was performing with some real material underneath it. There was actual discomfort in his face, not just the surface version. She decided to see how the performance responded to pressure. "I appreciate that," she said. "I want to ask you something, and I'd like you to answer it honestly." "Of course." "When you logged into the Hargrove Plaza security system at 5:12 yesterday afternoon, what were you looking for?" The jaw stopped moving. She watched his face go through several things in rapid succession. Shock, calculation, something that might have been a brief consideration of denial, and then the flattening that happens when a person realizes the ground under their plan is not there. "I don't—" He stopped. "The access log shows a badge credential login to the mall's external access portal at 5:12 p.m. yesterday. Your badge number, 6 minutes of access to the Tuesday archive. The 47-minute window between 2 p.m. and 2:47 was deleted. I have the log." The room was very quiet. "I want you to think carefully," she said, "about what you say next." He looked at his hands. He looked at the wall. He looked at a point somewhere above her left shoulder that contained, apparently, whatever he was trying to work out. "I went back to review the footage," he said finally, "to write a supplemental report, for accuracy." "And the deletion?" "I don't know what you're talking about." She nodded once. "Okay." She stood. "Officer Ferris, effective immediately, you are relieved of your active duty assignment pending an administrative review. You'll surrender your weapon and badge to the duty sergeant. You're not to access department systems or communicate with other department personnel about this matter. Do you understand?" He stood. He was taller than her by 4 inches, and she could see him register that physically, and she could see him decide not to use it, and she thought, good. Smart enough for that, at least. "This is a mistake," he said. "Maybe. But the review will determine that, not either of us." She walked to the door and opened it. "The duty sergeant is expecting you." He walked out without another word. She closed the door and stood with her hand on the doorknob for a moment. Then she went back to her desk and picked up her phone and called Chief Mack. He answered on the first ring. "I need to see you this morning," she said. "I saw your email." "There's more than what was in the email." A pause. "How much more?" "Enough that I think you need to hear it in person." Another pause, longer. 9 o'clock. My office, Shab. The meeting with Chief Mack lasted 40 minutes, and when it was over, the chief looked like a man who'd been handed a bill he'd been expecting but had hoped wouldn't arrive quite yet. He sat with his hands flat on his desk and looked at the printed access log and the backup footage still frame she'd brought, a frame grab showing the man in the dark jacket at the display case, and the 6 pages of notes she'd condensed into 2 typed pages overnight. "How confident are you in the backup footage?" he asked. Very. The system tech pulled it read only before the nightly sync. Chain of custody is clean. And the access log. Clean, he exhaled. If Ferris deleted the footage to protect himself from an administrative review, that's misconduct and evidence tampering. He rubbed his jaw. That's termination, at minimum. Yes. And if he was directed to do it, then it's something else. He looked at her. You said Broward mentioned Soto. He mentioned a relationship. He didn't have specifics. Soto's been in this department for 19 years. I know. He was quiet for a moment. What do you need? I need IA to officially open a file. I need Ferris's department access suspended. And I need someone to pull Soto's communication records for the last 48 hours, specifically any contact with Ferris between 8 a.m. Tuesday and 5 p.m. Wednesday. You're asking me to put a sitting deputy chief under surveillance. I'm asking you to authorize a communication review as part of an active misconduct investigation, which is within standard protocol. He looked at her for a long moment. You've been here 3 days, he said. I know. And you're already... He stopped, started again. I recruited you because I needed someone who could do exactly this. And I want you to know that I understand that. This isn't an objection. He picked up his pen. I'll authorize it. Thank you. She stood to leave. Captain? She turned. Watch your back. Soto didn't get to where she is by being slow. Nora nodded once and left. By noon, the IA file was open, Ferris's access was suspended, and the communication review request had been submitted. Nora ate lunch at her desk, a protein bar she'd had in her bag since Fort Delray, and worked through the complaint files IA had pulled. There were 11 complaints against Ferris in 3 years. 6 had been closed without investigation. 2 had been sustained but resulted in written warnings that carried no practical consequence. 3 were marked pending with no action date. She pulled the closing signatures on the 6 uninvestigated ones. 5 of them were signed by Deputy Chief Marlene Soto. She set that paper on one side of her desk by itself and looked at it while she finished the protein bar. The pattern wasn't subtle. Ferris made decisions that generated complaints. Soto buried the complaints. Whether Ferris knew what Soto was doing for him, whether it was a deliberate arrangement or just a lucky structural accident, was something the investigation would sort out. But the outcome was the same either way. Ferris had been allowed to operate without consequence for 3 years, and anyone who'd tried to complain about him had run their complaint into a wall with Soto's signature on it. She was still looking at the page when her desk phone rang. It was Webb, the mall systems tech. Captain Voss, I'm sorry to call directly, but I didn't know who else to... He stopped, collected himself. I found something. After you left last night, I kept running diagnostics on the archive server. There was a second access attempt. She sat forward. When? This morning. 7:48 a.m. Different credential this time. The login was made under a General Department Administrator account, not a specific badge number. Whoever it was tried to access the cloud backup server. Tried. The system rejected the request. The cloud backup requires a secondary authentication that the primary portal doesn't have. They didn't get in. He paused. But they tried. And the timestamp is... Captain, that's 45 minutes after your briefing with Officer Ferris. Nora looked at the wall. Ferris had been in her office until approximately 7:35. He'd walked out, gone to the duty sergeant, surrendered his badge. Somebody else had been at a computer at 7:48, trying to finish what he'd started. Send me the log, she said. Same format as the last one. Don't tell anyone else. Yes, ma'am. She hung up. She picked up her phone and dialed Broward. He answered fast. Captain? Where's Deputy Chief Soto right now? A pause. I don't know. I can find out. Don't make it obvious. Just tell me whether she's in the building. 20 seconds of silence. Then, she signed out at 7:50. Building log shows her badge leaving the garage at 7:52. 7:52. 4 minutes after the failed cloud access attempt. Nora stood up from her desk. She needed to move the cloud backup. She needed to move it now, before whoever had just failed to delete it found another way in. Because if that footage disappeared, the entire case became her word against a 3-year paper trail of buried complaints, and the version of that fight that she won was a lot harder and a lot longer. She was already dialing Webb back when her office door opened without a knock. Soto stood in the doorway. She wasn't in uniform. She was in a gray coat and civilian clothes, and she was holding a department tablet, and she looked at Nora across the office with the expression of someone who had come to have a conversation they'd been preparing. "Captain Voss," she said, "we need to talk." Nora put her phone down. She did it slowly, deliberately, the way you set something down when you want both hands free and you want the other person to see that you're not rushed. "Close the door," she said. Soto closed it. She came into the room the way people come into rooms when they've decided they own them. Not fast, not aggressive, just certain. She set the tablet on the corner of Nora's desk and didn't sit. "I heard about Ferris," she said. "That was fast." "It's a small building." Nora looked at her. "What do you want to talk about, Deputy Chief?" Soto picked up the tablet, turned it toward Nora. On the screen was an email chain. Internal, department addresses, time-stamped over the last 18 hours. Nora read the first 2 lines and kept her face neutral. "That's a communication between Ferris and a union rep," Soto said. "He's already filed a grievance. Wrongful suspension. He's arguing that the access log doesn't establish intent, and that accessing footage for a supplemental report is within standard officer protocol." "It is, if you don't delete anything." "He's saying he didn't delete anything. Then why is the footage gone?" Soto let the question sit for a moment. "He's saying there may have been a system error, that the deletion was automatic, a server malfunction." Nora looked at her. "Is that what you're saying?" "I'm saying it's what his union rep will argue. And I'm saying that without a chain of custody that places Ferris's hand specifically on the deletion command, without that specificity. The grievance has legs." She pulled the tablet back. "I've seen these cases. They drag. They cost the department. And they end badly for whoever initiated the suspension." The room was quiet except for the building ventilation running its low, constant hum. "Deputy Chief Soto," Nora said, "I want to make sure I'm understanding this conversation correctly. Are you advising me to reverse the suspension?" "I'm advising you to consider the full picture before this becomes something the department can't walk back." "The full picture," Nora said, "like the 6 complaints against Ferris that were closed without investigation, 5 of which carry your signature." Something moved in Soto's face. Not much. A slight tightening around the eyes, a small recalibration. "Complaints get reviewed and closed every day. That's standard process. Closed without investigation isn't standard process. Closed after investigation with a documented outcome, that's standard process." I reviewed those complaints. "Your signature is on the closure forms. There are no investigation notes, no interview records, no supporting documentation of any kind." Nora stood. "Deputy Chief, I want to be very direct with you. I came to this department to do a job. Part of that job is this audit. I didn't manufacture the complaint files, I didn't create the access log, and I didn't delete 47 minutes of security footage. Whatever is in those files exists because someone created it, and what I'm looking at right now is a pattern that predates me by 3 years." Soto looked at her for a long moment. The certainty in her posture didn't leave exactly, but it shifted, settled into something different. Less like ownership, more like assessment. "You've been here 4 days, she said. "I know. This department has... I know how long the department has been here." Nora moved to the door and opened it. "Thank you for the heads up about the grievance. I'll have my office respond to the union rep before end of day." Soto stood where she was for another second. Then she picked up the tablet and walked out. Nora closed the door and went immediately to her phone and called Webb. "Move the backup," she said when he answered. "Right now. Copy it to an external drive and take it off-site. Don't tell me where. Don't tell anyone at this department where. I want it somewhere it can't be reached remotely." "Is there... What's happening?" "Someone tried to access the cloud server this morning. They didn't get in, but they may try again through a different method. I need that footage somewhere physical where it requires a human being with a key to get to it." "Okay, yes, I'll do it now." "Call me when it's done. Use your personal phone." She hung up. She sat down at her desk. She looked at the 2 typed pages from the night before, and the complaint file papers, and the still frame from the backup footage. And she thought about the next move with the specific concentration she'd learned to apply to situations where the variables were shifting faster than she could track all of them. Soto had come in person. That meant the email route, the official communication route, felt too exposed. It meant Soto was trying to handle this in a way that didn't leave a record. The attempt on the cloud server at 7:48. Soto's badge leaving the garage at 7:52. The in-person visit now. Whatever Soto was managing, she was managing it quickly and without a paper trail. That was not the behavior of someone confident in her position. That was the behavior of someone whose position was more fragile than it looked, running out the options one by one. Nora needed to know why it was fragile. The complaint files were part of it, but complaint files alone didn't make a deputy chief this reactive. There was something else in those 18 months, something that the audit was going to find eventually and that Soto already knew was there. She picked up her phone and called IA. The Internal Affairs office was on the 5th floor, a deliberately unglamorous space that smelled like paper and recycled coffee and communicated through its general aesthetic that it was not a place anyone particularly wanted to be. Nora had requested a meeting with Lieutenant Dwight Archer, who ran the IA unit, and he'd said 11 a.m. She was there at 10:58. Archer was 60, close to retirement, with the specific patience of a man who had spent decades watching other people make mistakes and had long since stopped being surprised by the variety of methods people used to make them. He had a neat office and a clear desk and no photographs, which Nora thought probably said something about him, but she wasn't sure what. She laid out everything in order: the backup footage, the access log, the complaint files, the closure signatures, the second access attempt, the timeline. She didn't editorialize. She presented the sequence and let it speak. He listened without interrupting, which she appreciated. When she finished, he looked at the papers for a long moment. "The grievance is going to be a problem," he said. "I know. I need the union rep to understand that the evidence we have supports the suspension regardless of the intent argument. The union rep's job is to find the soft spots. I know his job. I need yours." She looked at him directly. "Lieutenant Archer, I need IA to formally assume this investigation today, not next week. Today. Because as long as it stays in my office, it's subject to procedural challenges and personnel interference that it won't be subject to once IA has jurisdiction." He tapped the desk once. "If I open a formal IA investigation into Ferris, Soto will know within the hour. She already knows there's a problem. The question is whether she has time to do anything about it before the investigation is locked in." He looked at her for a moment. "You think she's already managing this?" "I think she came to my office this morning to suggest I reverse the suspension. That's not a neutral act." He was quiet. He picked up one of the complaint file pages, the ones with Soto's closure signatures, and looked at it for a long moment. "I signed off on 2 of these closures," he said quietly. Nora had known that. She'd seen his initials in the chain, not as the primary reviewer, but as a secondary sign-off, the kind that happened when an IA supervisor rubber-stamped a deputy chief's recommendation without digging. "I'm not here about those 2, she said. "I'm here about the 5 where only Soto's signature is present and there's no IA involvement at all. And I'm here about the footage." He set the paper down. He looked old for a moment, not physically, but in the way of someone who has just recognized a specific kind of cost. "If I open this investigation and it leads where you're suggesting it leads, it's going to lead where the evidence leads. I don't know where that is yet. But if it leads to Soto, then it leads to Soto." He nodded, slowly, but he nodded. "I'll open the file this afternoon." "Thank you." She left his office and took the elevator down, and she was on the 2nd floor when her personal cell rang. Webb. "It's moved," he said. "Off-site. It's with my supervisor at home. She's not involved. She doesn't know what it contains. She just knows it's evidence in an active case and not to let it out of her possession." "Good. Thank you." She hung up. She stood in the elevator lobby for a moment and let herself feel, briefly, the thinness of the line she was walking, the specific anxiety of having moved a lot of pieces quickly and not yet knowing if she'd moved them fast enough. Then she went back to work. The crisis arrived at 3:47 in the afternoon, and it arrived from a direction she hadn't been watching. She was in her office reviewing the IA file transfer paperwork when the call came through on the department radio, not the main channel, the secondary tactical channel, which was used for situations that required coordination across multiple units. She had a scanner on her desk out of habit, and she heard the alert code before the dispatcher had finished saying it. A major vehicle accident on the Hartwell connector, the elevated interchange 2 miles from headquarters. Initial reports. A city transit bus had struck a barrier and come to rest at an angle across two lanes, with at least one vehicle trapped beneath the front axle. Injuries reported. Multiple units responding. She'd been in her office 4 days. She was a captain, not a field medic. This wasn't her call, but she'd heard the second part of the dispatch. Be advised, responding units report vehicle fire. Fire department ETA 12 minutes. 12 minutes. A bus on an elevated interchange with a trapped vehicle and active fire. She knew what 12 minutes meant in that scenario, and she knew it from experience that didn't come from reading incident reports. She was out of her chair and in the elevator before she'd made a conscious decision to move. She signed out a department vehicle from the garage and had it on Hartwell in under 4 minutes, which was fast but not fast enough to beat the smell. The specific metallic smoke combination that meant something had been burning for more than 90 seconds. The scene was bad. The transit bus, a full-size city bus, probably 40 passengers at this hour, had taken out a concrete divider and come to rest at roughly a 40-degree angle across the right lanes of the interchange. Beneath the front left corner of the bus, a compact sedan had been flattened to maybe half its original height. 2 units were already on scene, officers managing the traffic backup that was forming behind the incident, and a third was parked at the barrier with its lights running. She pulled up and got out. The officer at the barrier, a young woman, Officer D. Tran, according to her nameplate, turned at the sound of the door. Captain Voss? What's the status? Transit bus, approximately 32 passengers, majority evacuated. 7 confirmed injuries, 2 priority. 1 occupant in the trapped vehicle, status unknown. We can't get to her. Fire's coming from the wheel well of the bus. It's spreading. Tran looked at the bus. Fire department's 12 minutes out. We have an EMT crew 2 minutes behind us, but the fire won't wait for the EMT crew. No, ma'am. Nora looked at the bus. She looked at the fire. It was in the rear wheel well on the left side, orange and dirty, with a thick black smoke that came from burning hydraulic fluid and rubber. It hadn't reached the fuel tank. Yet. Is there anyone in the bus who's mobile? 3 passengers are still on board. One's refusing to move, says his leg is broken. 2 others are trying to help him. And the trapped vehicle. We can hear someone. She's conscious, but we can't reach her. The crush angle is wrong. We'd need equipment. Nora looked at the gap between the bus's undercarriage and the road surface. It was narrow, not impossible. She looked at the fire. She looked at the gap again. Do you have a trauma kit in your unit? Tron blinked. Standard kit, yes. Get it. She took off her jacket. She handed it to Tron along with her radio and her department phone. She kept only the trauma kit. Captain, keep the perimeter back and keep those passengers moving away from the bus. If the fire reaches the rear of the frame, you pull everyone back to the barrier and you do not come after me. Ma'am, I can't let you... You're not letting me do anything. I'm your commanding officer, and I'm giving you an order to manage the perimeter. She looked at Tron directly. Do your job. Tron hesitated for exactly 1 second. Then she said, Yes, Captain, and moved. Nora went to the bus. The gap between the undercarriage and the road was approximately 22 inches at its widest point. She'd been through tighter spaces in Kandahar, carrying a soldier who weighed 40 pounds more than her. She went in on her elbows and knees, trauma kit pushed ahead of her, and the first thing she registered was heat. Not fire heat yet, but the radiated warmth of a vehicle that had been stressed beyond its engineering and was releasing it in all directions. The sedan was worse than it had looked from outside. The roof had been compressed to maybe 3 feet of interior space, the driver's door was structural rubble, and the steering column had displaced forward into the cab. A woman, mid-40s, dark hair, a gash across her forehead bleeding freely, was conscious and pressed back against her seat in the only remaining space that had clearance. She looked at Nora with the specific expression of someone who has been alone in a terrible situation for several minutes and cannot quite believe that another person has appeared. I've got you, Nora said. What's your name? Lynn. The woman's voice was shaky but present. Lynn Hadley. Lynn, I'm Nora. I'm going to look at you quickly, okay? I need you to tell me if anything hurts more than anything else. My shoulder. And I can't feel my left foot. Nora ran through the assessment fast. The shoulder was probably fractured given the position of impact. She could see the deformity through the fabric of the blouse. The foot was a circulation question or a cord question, and she couldn't determine which without more space and more time. The head laceration was bleeding, but not arterial. The woman was breathing on both sides. She checked by placing her hand on the chest, and she was alert and oriented. "Here's what I need you to do," Nora said. "I need you to not move that left shoulder. At all. Can you do that?" "Yes." "I'm going to control the bleeding on your head, and then I need you to tell me whether you can slide toward me, toward the passenger side, slowly, just a few inches." "I'll try." Nora opened the trauma kit and had a pressure dressing on the head wound in 40 seconds. She'd done it in 20 once, in a vehicle that was on fire, but this wasn't yet a vehicle on fire, and she was going to keep it that way. She could smell the smoke getting thicker. "Lynn, I need you to start moving. Slow. Left shoulder stays still." The woman moved. It wasn't clean. She hissed through her teeth when her right arm took her weight, and she stopped twice, and the second time her face went gray enough that Nora said, "Breathe, just breathe," and waited until the color came back. But she moved. 3 inches, then 4. Nora reached her. She got her left hand under the woman's right arm and her right hand against the woman's back, and she said, "On 3," and they moved together. It was not smooth. It was slow, and it hurt, and Nora's elbow hit the undercarriage twice in a way that would leave marks she'd feel for a week. And Lynn Hadley cried out once when something shifted in the space above them because the bus was settling. But they moved. They came out from under the bus into the daylight, or the haze that passed for daylight in the smoke that was now spreading across the interchange. And Tran was there immediately with 2 other officers, and hands were reaching, and Lynn Hadley was pulled clear. Nora came out behind her and straightened up. She was covered in road grit and hydraulic fluid and someone else's blood, and the fire was worse than it had been when she'd gone in. It had moved from the wheel well up the panel of the rear section, and the black smoke was coming in visible waves now. The EMT crew arrived at that moment, vehicle braking hard at the perimeter. Fire department was still 7 minutes out. She handed the trauma kit to the first EMT who reached her, a compact woman who took in the scene in 1 second and started moving toward Lynn without being told anything. "Left shoulder fracture probable," Nora said. "Headlock controlled with pressure dressing. Left foot, check circulation, possible compartment involvement. I couldn't access it." The EMT nodded and kept moving. Tran appeared at Nora's shoulder. "The passenger in the bus, the broken leg." "I'm going." "Captain, the fire." "I'm going." She went back to the bus. The passenger with the broken leg was a large man, maybe 60, who had managed to get himself into the aisle but couldn't stand. The 2 other passengers still inside, an older woman and a teenage boy who looked like he was holding himself together through pure stubbornness, had been trying to support him and hadn't been able to move him. Nora assessed the leg fast. Mid-shaft femur fracture, she was fairly sure. The deformity was visible through the pant leg. Moving him without immobilization risked the femoral artery, and she had no splint material and no time to make one. She improvised with what she had: 2 folded seat cushions, the man's own belt, and her shoelace. It wasn't pretty, it wasn't protocol. It held. She and the teenage boy, who turned out to be stronger than he looked and scared enough to do exactly what he was told, got the man to the door. The 2 officers outside took his weight and got him down the steps. The fire hit the rear frame while she was still in the bus. She felt it before she saw it. A pressure change, a wave of heat from behind, and then the crackle that came from something structural catching. The older woman screamed. The teenager grabbed her arm. Nora moved them. She didn't think about it. She moved them the way she'd moved through every crisis since her first deployment, which was forward and fast and without the luxury of hesitation. Out the door, down the steps, away from the bus. The fire department arrived with 30 seconds to spare, engines braking in a cascade along the interchange shoulder. She stood 20 feet from the bus and watched the fire crew work. Her hands were shaking. She noticed that. She put them in her pockets because there was nothing useful to do with them at this moment, and shaking hands were a post-adrenaline response and not a character failing, but she still didn't want them visible. Tran appeared next to her. "You're bleeding," the officer said. Nora looked at her arm. There was a cut on her left forearm she hadn't noticed, the undercarriage probably. Not deep. She'd had worse from paperwork, more or less. "I'm fine." "The EMTs are—" "I'm fine, Tran. Document the scene." "Yes, Captain." She stood there for another minute, watching the fire crew advance on the bus with the measured efficiency of people who'd done this before. Lynn Hadley was on a stretcher. The man with the femur fracture was on a stretcher. Everyone was accounted for. The bus was burning and the fire crew was managing it, and nobody was inside anymore. She turned around and went back to her department vehicle. She sat in the driver's seat for a moment. She looked at her hands, which had stopped shaking. She looked at her jacket, which was still in Tran's hands 20 feet away, and thought about the badge on it, and thought about the fact that she had just crawled under a burning bus in a gray blazer she had bought for her swearing-in ceremony 3 days ago. She almost laughed. Not quite. The drive back to headquarters was quiet, except for the radio traffic wrapping up the scene. She listened with half her attention and drove with the other half and used the remaining piece of her brain, the piece that hadn't stopped working since that morning, to sort through what she knew about Soto. She was missing something. She'd known it since Soto had come into her office, and she'd felt the shape of it without being able to name it. 19 years in the department, a deputy chief who moved fast and thought faster. The complaint closures were real, but they were also the kind of thing that happened in departments everywhere. A culture of protection that was sloppy and wrong, but not necessarily orchestrated. Orchestrated was a different word. Orchestrated meant something specific was being protected. Not just a pattern of decisions, a specific thing. She parked in the headquarters garage and sat with the engine off. The 18-month window. Chief Mack had said 18 months when he'd described the problems. The review files he'd sent her covered 18 months. The complaint closures clustered in the last 18 months, though there were earlier ones too. What had happened 18 months ago? She hadn't asked that question directly. She'd been so focused on the pattern that she hadn't asked what had generated the pattern. She got out of the car and went upstairs. Chief Mack's assistant, a small, precise woman named Ortega, who had been in that office for 16 years, looked up when Nora came through the outer door and took in the state of her appearance without expression. "Is he in?" Nora asked. "He's on a call. 10 minutes. Nora sat in one of the outer office chairs and waited. She looked at the cut on her forearm. She pressed on it briefly to confirm it had stopped, and it had. At 4:39, the chief's door opened. "I heard about the Hartwell incident," he said when he saw her. "Is everyone—" "The woman from the sedan is in surgery, shoulder and a hairline fracture in 2 vertebrae. She's stable." He looked at her. "You pulled her out yourself." "With help." The officers at the scene are describing it differently. Officers at scenes tend to embellish. He looked at her for a moment, not the way a superior looks at a subordinate, but the way someone looks at a situation they weren't expecting and aren't sure how to categorize yet. Then he stepped back. "Come in." She went into his office. She closed the door. "I need you to tell me what happened 18 months ago," she said. He sat down. I was quiet for a moment, and she watched the decision move across his face. 18 months ago, he said slowly, we had an officer-involved shooting. A patrol officer named Garrett Sims. He shot an unarmed man during a traffic stop. The man survived, but he sustained a spinal injury. What was the finding? Justified. Soto led the review. The finding was justified use of force. And was it? Another pause. Longer. There was a witness, Mack said. A bystander who told responding officers he saw Sims with his weapon out before the driver had moved, before any aggression was reported. That witness statement was taken by a patrol officer and then he stopped. And then it disappeared, Nora said. It wasn't in the final report. The bystander tried to follow up twice and was told the case was closed. Mack looked at his desk. I didn't know about the witness statement until 8 months ago. Someone in records found a copy in a physical file. Misfiled, possibly deliberately. I've been trying to figure out how to reopen the case without tipping off whoever buried it. Yes. Nora looked at him. Chief, Soto led the shooting review. Soto closed the complaints. Soto came to my office this morning and suggested I reverse the suspension on the officer who deleted the footage from my detention. She laid it out flat. All of it connects to the same center. Mack looked like he'd aged 5 years in the last 4 minutes. If this goes to the shooting review, he said, this isn't a misconduct investigation. This is a criminal case. Yes. The room was very quiet. The witness, Nora said. The bystander. Do you know who he is? His name was in the misfiled copy. A man named Terrence Avery. He gave an address in the Millhaven district. Is he still there? I don't know. Does Soto know you found the witness statement? No, I told no one. Then I need that name and I need it tonight, because if Soto is connecting what she knows about the Ferris investigation to what she knows about the shooting review. Nora stopped, because her phone buzzed. She looked at it. It was a text from a number she didn't recognize, no name, 7 words. They know about Avery. He needs to move. Nora looked at the text for 3 seconds. Then she looked at Mac. Who else knows Avery's name, besides you and whoever filed that original witness statement? Mac's face had gone still. The patrol officer who took the statement, Sims, the shooter, and whoever buried it. So Soto. Almost certainly. Then either someone in this building just warned me, or someone is trying to flush Avery out by making me move first. She stood. Which patrol officer took the original statement? Mac opened his desk drawer and pulled a folder. He'd had it ready, she realized. He'd been carrying this for 8 months, and he'd been waiting for someone to hand it to. Officer Patricia Dunn. She transferred to the Millhaven District substation 14 months ago, requested the transfer herself. Millhaven, the same district where Avery lived. She filed the statement and then requested a transfer to the district where the witness lives, Nora said. I noticed that too. Have you spoken to her? No, I didn't want to move until I had someone I trusted inside the department. She looked at him. He looked back with the specific exhaustion of someone who has been holding something heavy for a long time and has finally found somewhere to set it down. I need Dunn's contact information, and I need Avery's last known address, she said. And I need you to not use your department phone or your department email to send either of those to me. He wrote them on a piece of paper, an actual piece of paper, handwritten, which was either old-fashioned or exactly right for this moment. He handed it to her across the desk. She took it and left. She drove to Millhaven in her personal vehicle, a 4-year-old sedan that she'd driven from Fort Delray and that had no department tracking, no department radio, nothing that connected it to the Callaway City PD system. She changed her shirt in the parking garage before she left, pulling a plain gray pullover from the bag she kept in the trunk out of 10 years of habit, because a captain's badge in an unmarked car in a residential district at 5 p.m. had a specific weight that she didn't want to carry into this conversation. The Millhaven district was working class and quiet, in the way of neighborhoods that had seen enough to stop being surprised by things. Row houses, small front yards, a corner store with a hand-lettered sign in the window, advertising a special on orange soda. Children on bikes in the middle of the street who moved for her car without being asked. Avery's address was a row house on Clement Street, brick face, dark green door, a plastic chair on the front step that had been rained on enough times to lose its original color. She parked 2 houses down and sat for a moment, watching the street, watching the windows. Nothing that looked like surveillance. Nothing that looked like a second vehicle waiting. She got out. She knocked. The man who answered the door was in his mid-50s, medium height, with the particular wariness in his eyes of someone who has been visited by official-looking people before and found those visits unpleasant. He looked at her street clothes, then at her face. Mr. Avery? Depends on who's asking. My name is Nora Voss. I'm the new captain at Callaway City PD. I'm not here in an official capacity. I'm here because I need to talk to you about what you saw 18 months ago. He looked at her for a long moment. Something in his expression shifted. Not trust, exactly, but the slight easing of someone who's been waiting for something and has just recognized its shape. You'd better come in, he said. The interior of the house was neat and lived in, a television running low in the back room, the smell of something cooked earlier that evening still in the air. Avery sat across from her at the kitchen table with his hands flat on the surface, and he told her what he'd seen. He told it plainly, without drama, the way people tell things they've rehearsed in their heads 100 times. He'd been on the sidewalk 20 feet from Garrett Sims's patrol car. He'd seen the traffic stop. He'd seen the driver, a young man, 30 or so, who Avery described as cooperative, hands visible, not moving aggressively. He'd seen Sims draw his weapon before the driver had reached toward anything. The officer shot him twice, Avery said. The driver hadn't done anything. He was reaching for the door handle to get out, like he was told, and the officer shot him. You gave a statement to the responding officer. A woman officer, yeah. Wrote everything down. She told me someone would follow up. He looked at the table. Nobody followed up. I called twice. Both times I got told the case was closed. He paused. The third time I called, someone told me I was mistaken about what I saw. Who told you that? Didn't give a name. Female voice. Senior, sounded like. Nora thought about Soto's voice, the measured cadence of it, the particular authority of someone who chose each word for its weight. Did anything else happen after that call? She asked. Avery looked at her steadily. Someone broke into my car, 2 weeks after. Didn't take anything, just went through the glove box, left everything out on the seat. He paused. I got the message. And you stayed quiet. I stayed quiet. He said it without apology and without self-judgment, and she respected that. A man alone against a police department was not a fair fight, and they both understood that. You gonna do something with what I'm telling you? Yes, but I need something from you first. I need a formal statement, not to the department, not through official channels. I need you to give it to a specific attorney, and I need you to do it tonight. Tonight. Someone in the department may know your name. I don't know how much time we have. He looked at her. He was quiet for a moment, and she could see him weighing things, a kind of accounting that only people who've made hard decisions understand. Then he said, Who's the attorney? She gave him a name she'd been carrying in her head since before she left Fort Delray, a civil rights attorney named Sandra Osei, who had spent 15 years working cases against municipal institutions, and who had a reputation for taking on things other attorneys described as impossible and winning about 60% of them, which in that field was extraordinary. I'll call her from my personal phone, Nora said. She's not connected to the department. Whatever you tell her is protected. He nodded once. That was enough. She made the call from Avery's front step. Osei answered on the third ring, and Nora gave her the shape of it in 4 sentences without names or specifics. And Osei said, Send me the address in a tone that communicated she understood exactly what kind of shape this was. Nora went back inside and stayed with Avery until Osei arrived 40 minutes later. A compact woman in her early 50s who came through the door with a recorder and a legal pad and the focused energy of someone whose evening had just become significantly more interesting. She looked at Nora once, quickly, and something passed between them that was not quite acknowledgement and not quite warning and was probably both. Nora left them to it. She drove back toward headquarters in the gathering dark, and she called Dunn from her personal phone. Dunn picked up on the first ring, which told her something. Captain Voss, Dunn said. She didn't ask how Nora had gotten the number. I've been waiting for this call for 8 months. You sent the text? Yes. How did you know they knew about Avery? A pause. Ferris called me this afternoon, from a number I didn't recognize. He said... She stopped. He said if I had anything left from the Sims case, I should make it disappear. He said Soto was cleaning house. There it was. He used those words. Yes, he's scared, Captain. Whatever he thought was covered isn't covered anymore, and he's trying to figure out what to do with that. Did you record the call? Another pause, longer. No, I should have. I didn't think fast enough. Did you save the number? Yes. Send it to me. Don't delete it. She had the number in her messages by the time she reached headquarters. She ran it through the department's reverse lookup. A civilian phone, prepaid, the kind you bought at a pharmacy with cash. Untraceable on the front end. But the call itself would exist in Ferris's phone records, and phone records were subpoenable, and Ferris calling Dunn from a burner the same afternoon his department access was suspended was not the act of someone managing a situation. It was the act of someone panicking. Panicking people made mistakes in sequence. The burner call to Dunn was a mistake. The access log deletion the day before was a mistake. Showing up in her office and opening with the union grievance angle was Soto's mistake. She was watching a structure collapse, and when structures collapsed, the question was always whether they fell in the right direction. She was in her office at 8:30 that evening when Broward knocked. She'd called him an hour earlier, told him to come in, told him what she was going to tell him, no more and no less. He sat down in the chair across from her desk and looked like a man who hadn't slept well in a while. She thought about the complaint files, about the 2 that had Archer's secondary signature, about the way Broward had told her about Soto from a position of knowing something for a long time and waiting for the right person to tell it to. The Sims shooting, she said. Did you know? He was quiet for a moment. I knew something was wrong. I didn't know what specifically. He looked at the wall. I knew the review was fast. Too fast. A shooting review that complicated. The interviews alone should have taken 3 weeks. Soto signed off in 9 days. Did you say anything? I mentioned it to Archer. He said Soto had expedited it because the officer involved was a veteran and the evidence was clear. He paused. I let it go. I shouldn't have. No, you shouldn't have. She said it matter-of-factly, not as an accusation. But you told me about Soto when you didn't have to. That matters. He looked at her. What happens now? Now I need you to do something that requires more trust in me than you've had time to develop. Tell me. Tomorrow morning, there's going to be a city oversight board session. Emergency session. I've already filed the request through the chief's office. I'm going to present the evidence. The footage deletion, the access log, the complaint file pattern, the witness statement from the Sims case, and the phone contact between Ferris and Dunn. She laid it out flat. I need you to testify, on the record, everything you've observed about the relationship between Ferris and Soto, and everything you know about the speed of the Sims review. Broward looked at his hands. If I testify against Soto, you'll have my office behind you, I'll have Archer behind me, and I'll have documentation that makes the testimony almost secondary. She paused. But testimony matters. The documentation shows what happened. You showing up says that someone inside the department knew it was wrong and wasn't willing to let it stay that way. He was quiet for a long moment. What time? He said. 9 a.m. He nodded. He stood. He put his hat on and went to the door and stopped with his hand on the frame. The woman from the accident today, he said. Lynn Hadley. I heard she's stable. Yes. The way the officers at the scene described what you did, he stopped. I just wanted to say that. He left without finishing the sentence, which was fine. She understood what it was. She spent the next 3 hours at her desk. She organized everything into 2 sets, one for the oversight board, one for Sandra Osei. She cross-referenced the complaint file dates against the Sims shooting timeline and found what she'd suspected. The complaint closures had accelerated sharply in the 2 months immediately following the shooting. 5 complaints in 8 weeks. All closed by Soto. All of them. When she looked at the names of the complainants, involving officers who had been present at or near the Sims incident scene, it wasn't random protection. It was targeted. Soto had spent 8 weeks after the shooting systematically closing every complaint that touched anyone who might know something or say something, and she'd done it through a process that looked routine because complaint closures were routine, and nobody had looked at the pattern because nobody had put all the files in one room at one time until tonight. She printed it all. She organized it by date. At 11:47, her personal phone rang. Osei. Avery gave me everything, the attorney said. Voice is steady, memory is detailed, internally consistent. This is a credible witness, Captain. A pause. I've also cross-referenced his account with the traffic stop footage. There's traffic stop footage? The intersection had a city traffic camera. Avery's statement is consistent with what the camera captured. The angle is partial. You can't see the moment of the shooting clearly, but you can see the sequence. The driver's hands, the door handle, the timing. Nora sat forward. That footage, does the department have it? The city transportation department has it. Your department would have had to request it formally. There's no request on file. Soto never requested it. Correct. It's been sitting in the city transportation archive for 18 months because nobody asked for it. She looked at the wall. 18 months of traffic camera footage in a municipal archive, never requested, because the person running the review already knew what she wanted the outcome to be and didn't want to risk finding something that complicated it. I need a copy of that footage, Nora said. Already requested. My paralegal filed with transportation at 11 p.m. Emergency records request. Active civil rights matter. They'll have it to me by 6 a.m. I have an oversight board session at 9. Then you'll have it before 9. She set the phone down and looked at everything spread across her desk. The printed files, the access log, the still frames from the backup footage, the handwritten pages of her own notes. 6 days of work. 14 months of preparation before that. 10 years of service before the preparation. She thought about the woman in the mall security office who hadn't known what was in the bag, and had assumed anyway. She thought about Lynn Hadley pressed into a 3-foot space under a burning bus. She thought about Terrence Avery, who'd given a statement and waited for a callback that never came, and who'd had his car broken into as a reminder of what the cost of remembering could be. She thought about the gap in the leather goods display, the thing that had caught her eye and started all of this, the 3-second pause that had put her in the wrong place at the wrong time and turned out to be exactly the right place after all. She started writing her opening statement for the oversight board. At 6:43 the next morning, she received the traffic camera footage from Osei's paralegal. She watched it on her laptop with her office door locked. The angle was northeast, partial, and the resolution was the specific grainy quality of municipal infrastructure cameras that had been installed 8 years ago and never upgraded. But it was enough. You could see the driver's hands, both of them, open at the level of the door handle. You could see the door begin to open. You could see, in the upper corner of the frame, the shift of movement that was Sims's arm coming up before the door had finished moving. The driver hadn't reached for anything. He'd been reaching to comply. She watched it twice. She made a time-stamped note. She added it to the oversight board folder. At 7:58, she was walking down the third-floor corridor toward the elevator when Deputy Chief Soto stepped out of her own office and into the hall. They looked at each other. Soto was in full uniform. She had the specific composure of someone who had made a decision and was living inside it. "I heard about the oversight session," she said. "It's in the public calendar. You move fast." "When it's necessary." Soto looked at the folder under Nora's arm. "You think you have enough?" "I think the oversight board will determine whether I have enough." "Captain." Soto's voice shifted, not softer, but different, less institutional, more personal. "I've been in this department for 19 years. I know where everybody is buried. What you think you've found the surface of something much larger. And if you go into that boardroom today without understanding the full structure, you're going to crack one wall and the rest is going to fall on you." Nora looked at her steadily. "Is that a threat?" "It's a fact." "Then tell me the full structure." She kept her voice level. "Right now. Tell me everything." Soto looked at her for a long moment. Something moved in her face, a calculation, a weighing of options, the specific expression of a person who has run every path and is trying to find one that leads somewhere other than where they're heading. She didn't speak. "That's what I thought," Nora said. She walked past her toward the elevator. She pressed the button. The elevator arrived. She stepped in. As the doors closed, she saw Soto still standing in the corridor, phone already in her hand, dialing. The oversight board session was held in the City Hall Annex Chamber, a formal room with high ceilings, a curved dais where 7 board members sat, and a public gallery that Nora had not expected to be occupied at 9 a.m. on a Wednesday. But it was. 12 people in the gallery, including 2 reporters she recognized from the department's media list, and one face she didn't recognize until she looked twice. Garrett Sims. He was in civilian clothes sitting in the second row of the gallery. He was 38, according to his file, currently on administrative leave pending an unrelated complaint. He sat with his arms crossed and his jaw forward and his eyes moving around the room in the particular way of someone who is trying to determine what kind of situation they've walked into. He hadn't been invited. She hadn't told anyone outside the chief's office and Broward and Archer what the session was about. The board meeting notice was public, but the agenda details weren't distributed outside the department. She looked at Sims once. He looked back. She looked away and set her folder on the table and arranged her materials and waited for the board chair to call the session to order. At 9:03, board chair Rosalind Tate called it. Nora stood and presented the evidence in the order she'd planned, the footage deletion first, because it was the clearest and most recent and required the least context. The access log, the backup footage showing the actual shoplifting sequence, her own detention. She put the timeline on the board screen and walked through it without editorializing. The board members' faces went through several things during the first 15 minutes, and she watched them without looking like she was watching them. Then she presented the complaint files. Then she presented the Sims shooting review timeline, the witness statement Avery had given Osei, and the traffic camera footage. The room was very quiet when the footage finished playing. Broward testified next. He was measured and precise and said exactly what he'd told her he would say. And what he said corroborated the documentary record without requiring him to speculate about anything he hadn't directly observed. Then Osei entered the room, and the tone shifted in the way rooms shift when an attorney appears with materials. "Ms. Osei," the board chair said. You represent? I represent Terrence Avery, a material witness in the Sims officer-involved shooting, and I represent the interests of the driver shot in that incident, Mr. Deshaun Prieto, who has authorized me to present documentation in this proceeding. She set a folder on the evidence table. Mr. Prieto has been living with a partial spinal injury for 18 months. He's never received an explanation of why the review that cleared his shooter was conducted in 9 days. The room was very quiet. Then the door to the chamber opened, and 2 men in suits walked in and showed credentials to the bailiff, and the board chair leaned forward and read the credentials and sat back with the expression of someone recalibrating in real time. Nora read the federal marshal's badge from 20 feet away. She hadn't called them. She hadn't known they were coming. But she had sent Osei the complete documentation packet at midnight, everything, including the city transportation footage, the complaint file pattern, and the phone records she'd pulled on Ferris. Osei had apparently made some calls of her own. The taller of the 2 marshals walked to the board dais and handed a document to board chair Tate. He said something Nora couldn't hear from the table. Tate read it. She looked up. She looked at Nora. Then she looked at the door that connected the chamber to the building corridor. Deputy Chief Marlene Soto walked through it at that exact moment, and the room watched her take 4 steps toward the public gallery before the marshal turned and said her name, and the way he said it, flat, certain, with no inflection that allowed for interpretation, told everyone in the room what the document in Tate's hands contained. Soto stopped. She stood very still. Nora watched her from this evidence table, watched the composure hold for exactly 3 seconds, which was longer than most people could manage it, and then watched it change into something that wasn't composure anymore, but wasn't collapse either. It was the face of someone who had calculated every option for the last 18 hours and had just run out of them. The marshal said something to her quietly. She nodded once. She walked with him toward the side exit. The room exhaled, and then Nora heard it, a voice from the gallery, low and close, not directed at her but loud enough to carry. She won't testify. She turned. Garrett Sims was on his feet, and he was looking not at Soto's retreating figure, but directly at Nora, and the look in his eyes was not the look of a man watching his protection walk out the door. It was the look of a man who still had cards left to play. Soto's not the one you have to worry about, he said. She's been managing me for 18 months because she thought she could keep the lid on. But I've got documents she doesn't know I kept, and if I walk out of this room without a deal, those documents go to someone who'll use them in a way none of you are going to like. The chamber was absolutely silent. Nora looked at him across the room. Sit down, Mr. Sims, she said. He didn't sit. I said sit down. She kept her voice the same temperature it had been all morning, not cold, not hard, just absolutely certain. Whatever you have, this board will review it. That's not a threat. It's a process. And the process doesn't stop because someone decides to perform in the middle of it. He held her gaze for a moment. Then he sat. But the folder he pulled from his jacket and set on the knee of his crossed leg, the folded, worn-looking folder that he held with the casual possessiveness of someone who'd been carrying it for a long time, was visible to everyone in the room. And when Nora looked at the board chair, Tate was looking at the folder too. Board chair. Rosalind Tate looked at the folder on Sims's knee for approximately 4 seconds. Then she looked at Nora. Then she looked at the 2 federal marshals standing near the side exit where Soto had just walked through. She was a careful woman, Tate. Nora had read her biography in the city's public records before filing the session request. 22 years on the oversight board, the last 6 as chair. She had the reputation of someone who did not move fast but moved correctly, which was a different thing and often more useful. Mr. Sims, Tate said, you are not a scheduled witness in this proceeding. You are present as a member of the public gallery. I have documents relevant to this proceeding. Then you will submit them through proper channels, which means through the board clerk, who will log and review them before they are presented. She looked at the clerk, a young man at the end of the dais. Mr. Tully, please collect the materials. Tully came down from the dais. Sims looked at him, then at Nora, then at the folder in his hand. There was a calculation happening behind his eyes. She could see it, the rapid sorting of leverage against exposure, the attempt to find the angle that still worked. He gave the folder to Tully. Nora watched him do it and kept her face neutral, but something in her settled. Not relief, not satisfaction, just the specific internal shift of a situation moving in the direction it should. Sims had bet on the folder being a threat. He'd made the threat in public. He'd lost the moment the board chair didn't flinch. Tully brought the folder to the dais. Tate opened it. She read the first page, turned to the second, stopped. She looked at the board member on her left, a retired judge named Hartley, whose expression had been carefully non-committal for the last 40 minutes. She showed him the page. He read it. He looked at Nora. "Captain Voss," Tate said, "the board is going to take a 15-minute recess. Please remain available." The recess room was a narrow space off the main corridor with a coffee machine that had been broken long enough that someone had put a sign on it, acknowledging the break rather than promising to fix it. Nora stood near the window with her arms crossed and waited. Osei found her after 3 minutes. "Sims's folder," Osei said, keeping her voice low. "What do you think's in it?" "I don't know, something about Soto, something she didn't want surfaced." Nora looked at the window. "He said she'd been managing him for 18 months. If she buried the witness statement to protect the shooting review, she needed Sims to stay quiet about what actually happened. That's leverage in both directions. She's been covering for him, and he's been aware of it. So he's been holding material about the cover-up itself." "That's my read." Osei was quiet for a moment. "If the folder contains evidence of Soto directing the burial of the witness statement, communications, notes, anything explicit, that's not just a departmental misconduct matter. That's obstruction." "I know. Which is why the marshals are here." Nora looked at her. "Did you call them?" Osei met her eyes. "I shared the documentation packet with a contact at the Federal Civil Rights Division. Standard notification when a case involves a shooting and a potential cover-up at the supervisory level. I should have told you." "Yes, you should have." "I know." Osei didn't apologize, which Nora respected more than she would have respected an apology. "Are we still moving in the same direction?" "Yes." The recess room door opened and Tully appeared. "Board is ready for you, Captain." When she walked back into the chamber, the energy in the room had changed in the specific way rooms change when something has been read that cannot be unread. The 7 board members had the focused, tight expressions of people who had been handed a problem and were deciding what kind of problem it was. Tate said, "Captain Voss, the materials submitted by Mr. Sims include what appears to be a series of internal communications between Deputy Chief Soto and Officer Sims in the weeks following the officer-involved shooting. These communications are dated and appear to constitute..." She paused. "They appear to constitute explicit direction regarding the witness statement, direction to suppress it." The gallery was very still. "The board is referring these materials to the federal marshals for evidentiary review. In addition, based on the totality of what has been presented this morning, the board is initiating a formal request for the city attorney's office to open a criminal referral in the matter of the Sims shooting review." She looked at Nora. "Captain, your suspension?" Nora said, "I was never suspended, board chair." Tate blinked. "I'm sorry?" "I have not been suspended. I am currently active in my role as captain. This proceeding involves my wrongful detention at Hargrove Plaza and the subsequent evidence tampering by Officer Ferris. The suspension referenced in the record was Ferris's, not mine." "Of course." Tate had the grace to look briefly embarrassed. "What I intended to say is that any question regarding your appointment or your conduct in this investigation is, in the board's view, resolved in your favor by what has been presented today." Nora nodded once. "The board thanks you for your diligence," Tate said. "Thank you, board chair." She sat down and looked at the table in front of her and breathed carefully, once. That was all she allowed herself. The proceedings wrapped at 11:40. By noon, the Callaway City PD press office had confirmed to 2 reporters that Deputy Chief Soto had been placed on administrative leave pending federal review. By 1 p.m., the city attorney had confirmed the criminal referral. By 2, the story was on the local news with a chyron that described the matter as a departmental misconduct investigation involving an officer-involved shooting and that named no individuals, which was factually accurate and also meaningless given that anyone in Callaway City who wanted to know the names knew them. Nora was in her office when Chief Mack came in at 2:30. He closed the door and sat down and looked at her across the desk with the expression of a man who had asked for a hammer and received something significantly more powerful and was trying to decide how he felt about that. "The board called me," he said. "I figured they would. Soto's attorney has already been in contact with the city, She's cooperating with the federal review. That's her choice to make. Ferris terminated his grievance. His union rep apparently advised him that proceeding with it in the current environment was... Mac paused. The phrase used was strategically inadvisable. Accurate phrase. Mac looked at her. You've been here 6 days. 7, as of this morning. He was quiet for a moment. The civilian who filmed the Hartwell accident, the bus incident, it's on the news. 5 different clips. Officers at the scene talked, apparently. He paused. One of the clips has 3 million views. She said nothing. People are calling the department. Media requests, mostly. Some from the city council. He rubbed his jaw. Nora, what do you need? It was the first time he'd used her first name. She looked at the folder on her desk. The same folder she'd carried into the oversight session that morning. Now thinner, because most of it had been submitted as evidence. I need to complete the 18-month audit. I need IA fully staffed to handle the Soto and Ferris matters without interruption. I need a formal policy review of the complaint closure process so that no single supervisor can unilaterally close a complaint without documented review. She paused. And I need Dunn transferred back to headquarters. She took a risk when she filed that witness statement, and she spent 14 months in a district posting that felt like punishment for doing the right thing. Mac nodded. He didn't write any of it down, which meant he was going to remember it. Anything else? Not today. He stood. He looked at her for a moment. I should tell you something. When I recruited you, I wasn't sure you'd be able to do this. Not because of your qualifications, but because... He stopped. Started again. This department protects itself. It's been doing it for a long time. I thought you might hit the wall and stop. What changed your mind? You didn't stop. He left. She sat with that for a moment. Then she picked up her phone and called Broward. He answered fast, which was becoming his pattern with her calls. How are you? She asked. A pause. Honest answer? Always. Tired. And, I don't know, something like relieved, except relieved feels too easy for what it actually is. I know what you mean. The officers are talking, he said. In the building, some of them are angry. Not at you, at the situation, at how long it went on. Another pause. Some of them aren't. They're just recalibrating. That's normal. Give it time. Captain, he hesitated. I should have come forward earlier, about the Sims shooting, about Soto. I knew enough. You did, and you know that, and I know that, and I'm not going to tell you it's fine because it's not entirely fine, but you came forward when it mattered. That doesn't erase the earlier choice, but it's not nothing either. She paused. Do your job well. That's how you settle it with yourself. He was quiet for a moment. Yes, Captain. She hung up and went to find Tran. But Officer D. Tran was in the second-floor break room, off shift, still in uniform, eating something from a vending machine with the slightly dazed expression of someone who'd been awake for a long time and was finally decelerating. She looked up when Nora came in and immediately straightened. At ease, Nora said. You're off the clock. Tran relaxed fractionally. Captain? Nora got herself a coffee from the machine that worked, the one that produced something technically describable as coffee if you were committed to generosity, and sat across from her. Yesterday, Nora said. Yes, ma'am. You managed a difficult scene under pressure, with a commanding officer doing something that probably looked insane from where you were standing. And you held the perimeter and followed the order and kept everyone else back. She paused. That was good work. Tran looked at the table. She had the expression of someone receiving something they didn't know how to hold. You went under a burning bus, she said. I had relevant training. We didn't know that. No, you didn't. Nora looked at her coffee. Which is the point, in a way. You followed the order of someone whose capabilities you didn't know yet. That takes its own kind of judgment, knowing when to trust the person in front of you, even when you can't see the full picture. She paused. Not blind trust, calibrated trust. You read the situation and you made a call. It was the right call. Tran looked up. Are you going to stay? She asked. It came out like it hadn't been entirely planned, like it had been sitting behind something and slipped through. She looked briefly embarrassed by it. In the department, you mean? Yes. I just started, Nora said. That's not exactly a yes. It's the most honest answer I have. I don't make promises about the future based on what today looks like. She stood. But I'm here now, and right now matters more than most people give it credit for. Tron nodded slowly. She looked like she was filing something away rather than just hearing it. Nora left her to her vending machine dinner. Deshaun Prieto was 31 years old and had been living in a ground-floor apartment in the Westfield district for the last 8 months because stairs were difficult. He'd been walking with a cane for 14 months. He'd been told the case was closed for 14 months. He had a daughter who was 6 and who had started asking questions he didn't have good answers for. Nora drove to his apartment at 4:30 that afternoon. She went alone. She brought nothing official. He answered the door in a gray t-shirt and sweatpants, cane in his right hand, and he looked at the badge on her belt with an expression that was not fear and not anger, but something more exhausted than either. "Mr. Prieto," she said, "my name is Nora Voss. I'm the captain of Callaway City PD. I'm here because I owe you something." He looked at her for a moment. "What do you owe me?" "An explanation, not a legal one. Your attorney will handle the legal process. A human one." She paused. "What happened to you was wrong. What happened afterward was worse. You were told you were mistaken about your own experience, and you weren't. There was a witness. There was camera footage. Both of them support exactly what you said happened. And the people who were supposed to investigate the truth chose not to." She held his gaze. "I can't undo any of it, but I can stand in front of you and say it clearly. It was wrong, it was deliberate, and the people responsible are being held accountable." Prieto was quiet for a long moment. He leaned against the doorframe. "The man who shot me," he said finally. "What happens to him?" "The criminal referral is in the city attorney's hands. I can't tell you what the outcome will be. What I can tell you is that the case is no longer closed, the evidence is no longer suppressed, and your witness is on record." He looked at the doorframe. He looked at something past her shoulder, somewhere outside, and she let him look. "My daughter thinks I was in a car accident," he said. "I told her it was a car accident. Because the other explanation—" He stopped. She didn't fill the silence. Some silence is needed to sit. "She's 6, he said. "At some point she's old enough." "At some point she is," Nora said. "What you tell her and when, that's yours. But she's going to see eventually that her father told the truth and stayed standing. That's not nothing." He looked at her. Something in his face shifted. Not resolution exactly, but the beginning of it. The edge of something that hadn't had an edge before. "Okay," he said. "Simply that. I'll be in contact through your attorney as the process moves forward." She left him at his door and walked back to her car and sat for a minute with her hands on the wheel. She thought about what it cost a person to tell the truth to the wrong audience. She thought about how long 14 months was when you were waiting for someone to believe you. She started the car and drove. The formal outcomes took weeks to fully materialize, because formal outcomes always did, and anyone who told you that justice moved fast had either never pursued it or was selling something. Marlene Soto was charged with obstruction of a criminal investigation and official misconduct. The Federal Civil Rights Division opened a parallel inquiry into the systemic complaint closure pattern. She did not fight extradition of the case to federal jurisdiction. She negotiated a cooperation agreement that her attorney described in public as comprehensive and that the federal attorney's office described in public as useful, and the gap between those two descriptions contained everything important. She resigned from the Callaway City PD on a Thursday morning. The resignation letter was 2 sentences. It was read aloud at a department briefing by Chief Mack, who did not editorialize. Garrett Sims was charged with excessive use of force and filing a false official report. His union representation withdrew from his case after reviewing the traffic camera footage. He appeared in court on a Tuesday, and when the footage was described in the charging documents, there were people in the gallery who had not known Deshaun Prieto's name 3 months ago and now did. Ferris was terminated for evidence tampering and misconduct. His grievance was withdrawn. He hired an attorney and filed a wrongful termination suit that was assessed by 3 separate employment law offices as having a poor outlook. The complaint closure policy was revised. Under the new protocol, no complaint could be closed without dual review, 1 supervisor and 1 IA officer, with documented reasoning required for any determination other than sustained or unfounded. It was not a perfect system. Nora knew it was not a perfect system, but it was a system with a second set of eyes, and that mattered. Patricia Dunn transferred back to headquarters in the 4th week. She showed up in Nora's doorway on her first morning back, not quite at attention, not quite relaxed. The posture of someone who has been living in an uncomfortable in-between and isn't sure yet what the new geography looks like. "You didn't have to do this," Dunn said. "I know. The transfer request, you didn't have to push it through. You filed a witness statement and spent 14 months in Millhaven as a result. You shouldn't have been there in the first place." Nora looked at her directly. "You did the right thing when it was expensive to do it. That doesn't go unrecognized in my department." Dunn looked at the floor briefly, then up. "Thank you, Captain." "Get to work." The City Oversight Board released its final report 6 weeks after the hearing. It was 43 pages. The executive summary described the events as a systemic failure of supervisory accountability, enabled by structural gaps in complaint review protocol, and compounded by an evidence suppression pattern that persisted across multiple incidents. It recommended the audit protocol Nora had proposed, the policy revision she'd drafted, and a formal review of the Sims shooting by an independent panel. Page 31 included a paragraph about the events at Hargrove Plaza. It described the detention as procedurally unjustified and indicative of the assumption-based decision-making that the department's new leadership has been tasked with correcting. It noted that the responding officer had been terminated and that the evidence of the detention had been preserved through the actions of the department captain who had herself been the subject of the detention. Nora read that paragraph twice, not because she needed to, but because there was something in seeing it written that was different from knowing it. She set the report down and picked up her coffee and looked at the window. Lynn Hadley sent a card. It arrived at the department 6 weeks after the accident, addressed to Captain N. Voss, Callaway City PD, in handwriting that leaned to the left in a way that probably reflected the shoulder fracture and the recovery it was still demanding. Inside was a simple card, no elaborate design, and 4 lines of writing. "I keep trying to think of the right thing to say. I don't have it. You went under a burning bus for a stranger. My daughter keeps asking me to tell the story again. I tell it every time she asks." Nora read it at her desk and then set it in the top drawer, the one she kept clear for things that didn't have a proper filing category. She thought about Lynn Hadley's daughter asking to hear the story. She thought about the way children understood the world through stories before they understood it through systems and structures and oversight boards. And she thought about what the story actually was, not the dramatic version, not the 3 million view clip of smoke and emergency lights, but the real one. A woman crawled under a bus because she knew what to do, and there wasn't anyone else to do it. That was the whole story. The rest was context. The night before the department's formal recognition ceremony, a city-mandated public event that Nora had been told about 6 weeks in advance and had spent 6 weeks trying to find a way to shorten without appearing to find a way to shorten. She drove to Hargrove Plaza. The mall closed at 9. She was there at 8:45, late enough that the crowds were thinning, early enough that the stores were still lit. She parked in the same structure she'd parked in 7 weeks ago and walked in through the main entrance and stood for a moment in the atrium. The skylights were dark now, evening, no ambient light coming through. But the interior lights gave the space the particular glow of places designed to make people feel comfortable spending money. The same stores, the same fixtures, the benches in the same positions. She walked to Meridian. The store was still open. She went in through the main entrance, the same door she'd walked out of 7 weeks ago with a shopping bag and a receipt, and no idea what was about to happen. She walked to the first floor. She walked to the section near the main exit where the leather goods display sat. The gap she'd noticed was filled in now. Different merchandise, but the shelf was full. She stood there for a moment. A sales associate approached, young, friendly, the professional smile of someone 10 minutes from closing time. "Can I help you find something?" "No," Nora said. "I'm just looking." The associate nodded and moved on. She stood there for another minute. She thought about the 3 seconds she'd spent looking at this display on a Tuesday afternoon, and the 47 minutes that had followed, and the 7 weeks after that. She thought about the way a small thing, a gap on a shelf, a 2-word description, a careless decision, could set off a sequence that ran longer and deeper than anyone standing at the beginning could see. She thought about Terrence Avery sitting in his kitchen with his hands flat on the table, waiting for someone to believe him. She thought about Patricia Dunn filing a witness statement and then waiting 14 months in a district substation for someone to notice. She thought about Deshaun Prieto telling his daughter it was a car accident because the true explanation was too complicated for a 6-year-old and possibly also for himself. None of it had started with a grand act. None of it had been orchestrated or planned. It had started with ordinary moments. A bystander who saw something, an officer who wrote it down, a captain who looked at a gap in a shelf for 3 seconds and ended up in a room that changed everything. She left the store and walked back through the atrium and out to her car. She sat in the parking structure with her hands on the wheel. The thing she'd been trying to articulate for 7 weeks, the thing she kept coming close to and then not quite reaching, finally found its shape in that parking structure, in the quiet after 8:45 on a Thursday night. It wasn't about her. It had never been about her. Not really. The handcuffs and the security office and the departmental politics, those were her entry point, but the story was bigger than the entry point. It was about the gap between what institutions were supposed to do and what they actually did when nobody was measuring the distance. It was about the cost of that gap, not in policy terms, not in oversight board language, but in actual human weight. Avery waiting for a callback. Prieto lying to his daughter. Dunn eating lunch alone in a Millhaven substation for 14 months, wondering if the right decision had been a mistake. Institutions didn't close that gap automatically. They needed people inside them who were willing to see it, name it, and keep walking toward it even when the walking was expensive. That was the job. Not the badge, not the rank, not the press coverage. The job was the gap. She started the car. The recognition ceremony was held in City Hall's main atrium, a larger space than the oversight chamber, with better lighting and an unfortunate sound system that gave every amplified voice a slight echo. Chief Mack presided. Several council members spoke, though their remarks were the kind of remarks that council members gave when they wanted to be associated with a positive development without having been present for the difficult parts. The city presented Nora with a formal commendation for conduct at the Hartwell accident scene. She accepted it because refusing it would have been theater of a different kind, and she was tired of theater. Officer Tran was also recognized. Nora had requested that specifically. Broward received a commendation for his testimony. He stood at the microphone for about 12 seconds and said 3 sentences that were sincere and unembellished and were the best 12 seconds of the ceremony. Dunn was recognized, finally and publicly, for filing the witness statement 18 months ago, for doing the right thing in a department that hadn't been ready to hear it. She stood at the microphone with the expression of someone who had waited a long time for a moment and wasn't quite sure the moment was real, and she said thank you in a voice that was steadier than it had any right to be. The council member from the Westfield district stood and said that the city was committed to ensuring that the systemic failures exposed by this process would not recur. He said several other things. Nora listened to the first 3 sentences and then spent the remaining time looking at the room, at the officers in the gallery, at the mix of faces that contained everything from genuine relief to careful recalibration to the specific discomfort of people who'd spent years not looking at something and were now required to look. She looked at Tran, who was sitting with her hat in her lap and her back straight. She looked at Dunn, who had her hands folded and her eyes clear. She looked at the badge on her jacket, the same one that had been pinned there 7 weeks ago, the same one that had been in her bag in a mall security office while a guard read out a 2-word description and decided it was sufficient. It wasn't a symbol exactly, or maybe it was, but the symbol wasn't what people thought it was. It wasn't authority. It wasn't rank. It was a proposition. A recurring question asked every time you put it on. Are you going to do the job, or are you going to protect the appearance of the job? The appearance was easier. The appearance was always easier. It required less, cost less, demanded nothing from the place in you that could be diminished. The job was harder and less visible and frequently thankless, and it left marks on you that didn't show on the outside. She already knew which one she was going to keep choosing. She'd known it since Fort Delray. Since before that, probably. Since the first time she'd kept someone alive under conditions that made alive feel improbable. And she'd understood in her bones that the work wasn't about the outcome you wanted. It was about the accuracy of the effort you made toward it. When the ceremony ended, she stayed for the obligatory 45 minutes of conversation that followed. She was learning to manage these, the cluster and circulate of public events. And then she drove back to headquarters alone. She went up to her office. She sat at her desk. She opened the next file in the audit stack. 3 weeks later, Terrence Avery testified in the civil case that Sandra Osei had filed on Deshaun Prieto's behalf. He sat at the witness table in a room considerably more formal than his kitchen, and he told the same story he'd told Nora, plainly, without drama, with the quiet precision of someone who'd been carrying an account in his head for a long time and knew every word of it. The city settled the case before closing arguments. The settlement terms included a financial component that Nora was not privy to and a formal written acknowledgement from the city, 3 paragraphs, precise language, negotiated carefully, that the officer-involved shooting review had been conducted with material omissions and that the witness account had been improperly excluded from the record. It wasn't enough. It was never going to be enough for what it cost. But it was true, and it was public, and it was on record, and that mattered in ways that were difficult to measure but very easy to feel. Prieto called Osei when he heard the settlement terms. Osei told Nora about the call in a brief text. He said he needed a minute. I gave him the minute. When he came back on the line, he said he thought he could explain it to his daughter now. Nora read the text twice. She set her phone down. She looked at the window. Outside, Callaway City was doing what cities did, moving and grinding and failing and occasionally surprising itself with something that worked. Traffic on Hartwell. The construction on 5th that had been going on for 8 months with no visible endpoint. The corner store on Clement Street with its hand-lettered sign. There was nothing dramatic in any of it. There rarely was, in the ordinary operation of things. The drama was retrospective, the story you told later about a sequence of moments that hadn't seemed like a sequence when you were living through them. The job was the present tense, always the present tense. She pulled the next file off the stack. She opened it. She started to read. 7 weeks after she'd walked into Hargrove Plaza looking for a blazer to wear to her own swearing-in, Nora Voss understood something she hadn't been able to articulate then, something that had been forming in the background of every difficult day since, slowly enough that she hadn't noticed it until it was complete. The woman who'd been cuffed in that mall wasn't a victim of bad luck. She was the result of every dismissal that had ever moved past its target without consequence, every assumption left unchallenged, every corner cut because cutting it was easier, every report that said unfounded because someone didn't feel like digging. Those things accumulated, they built structures, and eventually those structures produced moments exactly like the one in that security office. A person standing in a room being told, by the weight of everyone else's certainty, that she was something she wasn't. The answer to that wasn't rage. It wasn't performance. It wasn't a speech or a ceremony or a commendation certificate now framed on an office wall. She still hadn't gotten around to properly decorating. The answer was accuracy. Accurate assessment, accurate record, accurate consequence. Institutions were collections of decisions, and decisions were made by people, and people were capable of better or worse depending on what the structure around them rewarded. Change the structure, change the decisions, change enough decisions, change the institution. It was slow. It was incomplete. It would require doing again after she'd done it once, and doing again after that. She had been dismissed because someone looked at her and decided what she was before she'd spoken a word. She had answered by doing exactly what she came to do. That was the whole story. Everything else, the backup drive, the access log, the traffic camera, the 47 deleted minutes, the folder on Sims's knee, the 4 lines in Lynn Hadley's card, Deshaun Prieto explaining something true to his daughter for the first time. All of it was detail. All of it was what accuracy looked like when it finally arrived somewhere after a long journey through everything designed to stop it. She closed the file. She opened the next one. Outside her